You can hear me. Okay, good morning once again, and I want to welcome
Yeah, I can
you.
hear you.
Okay, I want to welcome you to this special webinar that has been organized by the Institute of Export Operations and Management Nigeria, in collaboration with Ingredient Sourcing Solution. And we are glad that you are joining us on this special webinar that is focused on cashew market, value chain. And like I said before, my name is Dennis Aribido. I'm the head of trade research and intelligence for the Institute of Export Operations and Management Nigeria. And we are glad to have as our special facilitator today, Mr. Jim Fitzpatrick, who is the CEO of Ingredient Sourcing Solution. And Mr. Jim, as I will call him, as the time goes on now, Mr. Jim has over 30 years, global experience in commodity and ingredient sourcing. He has worked with both, international development agencies over the years, as well as private and corporate organizations. His experience is so, vast, most especially in commodities spanning, various continents, especially in Africa. And he has done a tremendous, research work in Ghana, in West Africa generally. And, his expertise on commodity is second to none. And we are very glad that he's joining us today out of his very busy schedule to, share with us, and also various participants can glean from the insights that he will be sharing in the course of this webinar. So we are glad, and we want to say welcome, Jim, for being our facilitator today. So also I want to introduce to you Mr. Ufon Udofia, who is the Executive Secretary and the CEO of Institute of Export Operations and Management. I call him Mr., but let me just say officially that he's a doctor. We call him Dr. Udofia, and he has over 3 decades of experience in international trade, spanning both private and public sector. He has worked extensively with with government agencies across Africa, and he's well sorted experts in international trade. And we'll be sharing or gleaning from his expertise as well in the course of this webinar. And we will have opportunity to also, contribute in the course of the Q&A. So without further ado, I want to hand over the mic to Mr. Jim to also, kickstart his presentation. Thank you very much. And before we go on, I also want to remind us as Mr. Jim continues with his presentation, if you have any question, please just post it in the comment section so that in the course of the Q&A, we'll be able to share with the panelists. Thank you very much. Mr. Jim?
Good morning. Good morning, Dennis. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. You're very welcome. I'm just adjusting a little bit of feedback there on my mic. So good morning, and thank you very much for joining us. We're going to talk today about the cashew market specifically, and particularly about what I call the problem. This is a significant problem in the sector, and I think it's as significant in Nigeria as it is in any other country. What is that problem? Well, despite making several steps forward over many years, the African cashew sector remains in a vulnerable position. Progress has been uneven, and it may even be unsustainable. So, for example, African cashew processors have established a 20% share of the European market. But still, many buyers in Europe have never bought African cashew kernels. Many are not even aware of the opportunity. Meantime, in the US market, we see a very poor performance. The share of African cashew kernels of the US market is just below 6% at present. That's actually a lower market share than a decade ago. So there's clearly a problem. What we see is that African cashew kernel marketing in Europe and in the United States, the two key markets, as we will see, has plateaued. And Nigeria, surprisingly to me, Nigeria has underperformed. Given the level of investment in processing, given the developments in production and the improvements in quality, I think it's reasonable to say that Nigeria, as an exporter of cashew kernels, has underperformed. So my business is to try and work on those kind of problems. I've been in consulting and business advisory and business development for many years, specialist in cashews, work in other sectors, believe in the future of the African cashew industry. Let's have a look and see how has this situation arisen and how can our partnership with IEOM address it. So first of all, how has this situation arisen? And I think firstly, we should be very clear that generally cashew processors in African countries have given a low priority to marketing, particularly to sales as part of marketing. I think that the sector has a commodity trading culture. It's about moving the product in and out as quickly as possible and maximizing the cash flow without necessarily focusing on the much needed sales and marketing functions. Development organizations, international and national, have long recognized this challenge, but they're simply not equipped to deliver these long-term market-based solutions. That's not in their DNA. It is in ours. And it's not only about selling cashew kernels, it's about fostering investment. It's about the long term. It's about developing a sector that can be sustainable and resilient for many years to come. We need to promote investment. We need to foster good communication with investors as well as with buyers. And if we look at this, and if we look at some of the case studies in Nigeria, in Mozambique, in Ivory Coast, we can see that this approach can work. It's worked in individual cases. Can we make it work for the entire sector? How can our partnership, that's the partnership between the Cashew Club, ISS, and IEOM, support this task to solve this problem? If you know me, if you know ISS, if you know the Cashew Club, you know that we have a combination of many years of trading and sales experience and a deep market understanding. We've also got a global network, and that's supported by hands-on expertise in trading and in coaching over many years. IEOM brings the same level of expertise in sector development and project management, with national linkages and a tremendous network within Nigeria and elsewhere. It also brings the personnel and logistical resources necessary to address this task. So together, this partnership of resources and expertise with the local, national, and a global network in the cashew sector gives us the resources to add to our commitment to deliver support and to deliver a change in sales and marketing practice in the cashew sector in Nigeria and beyond. How do we propose to do this? How can we address this problem? Well, we've isolated the fact that, first of all, the big change is to develop the right frame of mind, to develop a sales frame of mind. This is, as I see it, the precondition for good market practice, for good sales practice, and for long-term sustainability of the industry. Far too many factories have brokens, off-grades, warehouses full of stock, and they wonder why they're not making money. And the answer to that is not in processing. The answer is not in their cash flow. The answer is in their marketing and in their sales approach. To improve that, we propose this partnership between an organization with a successful record in engagement with the public sector and a private sector organization with the experience, with the expertise, and especially the network. And that's when it comes down to selling, a network is absolutely essential to deliver marketing success. We see this as based on good selection of target buyers. Select early and select the right buyers to work with. We think we need to target areas of weakness in the sector, so particularly markets where the Nigerian cashew sector is not successful at the moment. That would be the problem areas of low market share in the United States, for example, low market share in premium markets, difficulty marketing broken grades, and difficulty marketing off-color grades, scorched, and others. So we're offering a program that's knowledge-based, market networked for individuals and for corporations to build capacity for export market entry. And it can be entry or it can be improvement. And that's based on a partnership with good selection of candidates to participate, either corporate or individual, an extensive training system which has been tried and tested, access to a network of buyers, the global network of buyers, to develop the export skills. So I'd invite you, if you're interested in this, and if you're in business, you should be interested in this, contact IEOM to build a program that meets your needs. So we're offering to build bespoke individual programs for development organizations, for corporations, for government organizations to move the marketing and sales capacity in the cashew sector in the country forward. Let's have a look at that market. Let's have a look at the world cashew market as it stands in 2025. And I'm going to look at it, I'll give you a big picture look. We'll have a look at production, then we'll have a look at the consumption, and finally we'll figure out some of the key trends in the market to give us some indicators where this business is going and the huge opportunity that's within it. So we're going to start, and I'm going to show you a series of maps on the various factors. So starting with production. So if you look at this slide, the darker the green color, the more important for production. And you can see that Nigeria is clearly an important producer. If we look at it on a regional basis, West Africa is the most important growing region for cashews over the last decade. And we have seen increases in Southeast Asia, particularly in Cambodia, which now produces about 15% of the world's cashews. But essentially what you see is Southeast Asia, mainly Cambodia, West Africa, India, and then East Africa as producing regions. 84% is in the Northern Hemisphere. That's the harvests that start in January and in some cases go on until July. The balance is in the Southern Hemisphere. Those harvests start earliest in August and they finish in January. Nigeria is in the Northern Hemisphere, obviously. So your harvest is starting early in the year and finishing, I guess, around about now in May. Let's have a look at the consumers. So the first thing to note, with the exception of India, cashews are generally not heavily consumed in the countries where they grow. So in most West Africa, there's a very small market for cashew kernels. Nigeria is an exception. There is a thriving market domestically for cashew kernels in Nigeria. But in Cambodia, in Vietnam, consumption of cashews is very low. They're exporters. Only India is a producer and consumer, and it is the largest consumer in the world with 37%. So we look at the market and we think India is the leader, but we cannot export to India because the market is effectively closed by the imposition of very high levels of import tariffs. Next best stop, Western Europe, around about 18% of the market. North America, 17%. And coming up quickly is China. Last year, about 12% of world demand, and that is going to increase, and it has been increasing quickly. So we will see China coming up as a major importer of cashew kernels in the future. China cannot grow cashews apart from one small area in the very southern tip of the country. Now, what changes the production into a product that can be consumed is processing, of course. And when we look at processing, what we can see is that it is highly concentrated. Of the world crop of about 5.5 million tons this year, about 3 million tons is processed in Vietnam, 1.7 million tons in India. About 600,000 tons is processed on the continent of Africa. That'll be higher this year. 2024, it was 600,000. It will go up this year. And then Brazil processes its own crop, about 120,000 tons. So between Vietnam and India, about 86% of world cashew processing is covered. And that, of course, leads to the trade in raw cashew nuts to those countries. That concentration of processing in two countries essentially defines the structure of the cashew market and has done so for the past 20 years. And if we look at the extent of that, we'll see in 2024 about 3.5 million tons of raw cashews being cashews in shell, were traded mainly from Africa to India and Vietnam with the value of about $5 billion US. That means that the value that could be retained in African countries, including Nigeria, is lost. The value of processing and re-export. Because if we look at Vietnam, Vietnam imports almost 90% of the in-shell cashews that it processes, and it exports virtually all of that. That is then processed and re-exported to markets in Europe, North America, in China, and elsewhere. In the case of India, because India is a bigger producer, the import is about 64% of the raw cashew nuts that are used in India. Those are not generally re-exported. Some are re-exported, but a small proportion. Most Indian cashews are consumed in India. Remember, India has 37% of the world consumption of cashews. So with 12% of production and 37% of consumption, you can see why India is a huge importer of raw cashew nuts. Vietnam, on the other hand, to remind you, imports almost 3 million tons last year, and that was processed and re-exported. And those are the two characteristics that define the international trade. So when we look at that trade, what we see is that we have a major export from Vietnam to markets in North America, in Europe, and in Asia, about 95% of the kernels that are produced, 5% being consumed in the domestic market. In India, it consumes the raw cashew nuts that it grows and the bulk of the raw cashew nuts that it imports. Exports only account for about 10% of India's processing. Brazil is a growing consumer, exports about 80% of its production, but its production these days is quite low, only 120,000 tons. And Africa is an exporter as a continent, an exporter either of raw cashew nuts, which accounts for the bulk of the material, or an exporter of the kernels which it produces. As I said, most African countries are not major consumers of cashew kernels. So when we look at this, we see the trade lanes, and I just thought I'd pick out a few interesting trade lanes in the cashew industry. So bearing in mind that the nuts processed in Vietnam are mainly African, either African or Cambodian, and the nuts processed in India are from all kinds of places, but mostly from Africa, and about 36% grown in India. So the main trade lanes that we see are Vietnam to North America, That's about 24% of the world trade. And Vietnam has an 89% share of that market, an 89% share of the North American market. If we look at the Vietnamese channel to Europe, also important, about 18% of world trade, and Vietnam has a 74% share. So we need to ask ourselves, if we look at the location, here's Vietnam in the east, West Africa, very close to Europe, closer to the United States. How has it happened? How has it happened that the raw cashew nuts go this direction from west to east? They're processed and they're shipped back. And that's simply because the processing capacity has not evolved in West Africa yet. But that is changing. Today, the trade lane from African countries to Europe, and it's mostly from West Africa, is about 4% of the world trade, and there's around about a 17% share in 2024. Positively, that's changed in the early part of this year, and it's now 20% during the first quarter. So 20% of Europe's imports in the first quarter of 2025 were from African countries, and that's obviously a positive move. If we look at African trade to North America, it accounts only for about 1.4% of world trade. And in 2024, there was a 7% share. That unfortunately has dropped this year, and that's down by the end of March. That was back down towards 6%. So we see the trade channels dominated by Vietnam's export of cashew kernels. So this evolves simply because the processing capacity has not evolved in West Africa for a whole series of reasons, but that is changing, and I'm going to come to that shortly. So let's just have a closer look at production then. So first of all, we'll take a look at who grows cashews. And sometimes we look in our own country and we think that we are dealing with a unique situation. But in actual fact, it's a similar situation right across the world. Cashews are grown by smallholders. There are a few plantations, but very few. They say there's about 5 million cashew farmers or farm families around the world. Very difficult to check whether that number is right or wrong, but I'm sure it's not far wrong. Cashews are attractive to smallholders. They're easy entry, the inputs are low, the level of expertise for a cashew to grow is not particularly high, but because of those factors, we found that cashews tend to grow on the more marginal land, and they tend to be characterized by low yields. So although they're grown by smallholders, the contribution to the smallholder farm family income has been relatively modest over the years. So we have been looking at low yields. Hopefully that will change too. But this factor, the structure of the supply chain based on smallholders, has a fundamental influence on how this supply chain works. And you can see on the yield. So now we're talking about, when we talk about yield in this context, we're talking about the production per hectare. And if we just look at the contrast, in the high end in Cambodia, 2.5 tons per hectare. The average in Cambodia is 1.4 tons per hectare. The average in Vietnam is 1.1. And if we work our way down through African countries, including Nigeria, we can see that although the yield per hectare has improved in recent years, it's still only a fraction of what's being achieved in Cambodia or in Vietnam or in India. So there's a lot of improvement opportunity there too. Let's have a look at the production trend. So as you can see, cashew production has been growing over the years. We've seen a situation of steady growth, initially driven by production in West Africa. So today we can see West Africa with a share about 48% in 2024. Steady trend upwards. I'm going to come back shortly and talk about this big step upwards in 2021. But overall, we're looking at production growing consistently for 20 years, a surge in Cambodian production in 2021, and that brought production to a new level, and there it has stayed and is continuing to grow. So we're still looking at a growth rate of just under 7% per annum in production. we're looking at a longer term growth rate of 5.5%. So it's reasonable to say that production growth is expanding. 2024 wasn't a particularly good crop for weather reasons, but looks like 2025 will be, I think, probably a record crop globally. We're seeing a somewhat late crops in some areas, but in Cambodia, for example, estimates of the crop are going up week by week as more and more arrivals. In Ivory Coast, the world's largest producer, similar situation. So expect a good crop in 2025. Expect more marketing challenges as production grows over the years, because if production continues to grow at 6.7% every year, it's very unlikely that consumption will keep pace with that. So let's have a look at the seasonality. And I wanted to bring seasonality into this conversation because there's a couple of really important factors. So when we look at the raw cashew nut trade and we look at this 3.5 million tons, 3 to 3.5 million tons that's traded every year, what we see is that the production is in the early part of the year, but the availability and the arrival of the nuts to processors in India and in Vietnam is a little bit later on due to the lag in getting the cargo together and moving it. So although we've seen this increase in production, we've also seen the entry of Cambodia. And the entry of Cambodia means that production has shifted a little bit earlier. It means that not only is there an increase in production, but there is a slight change in the availability. So Cambodian raw cashew nuts harvest, in a normal season, they're starting in January and continuing through into May. It's a little bit different this year. The crop was a little bit late. But that means now, different to 2020, Vietnamese buyers have about 850,000 tons available literally on their doorstep, less than a day's drive away in Cambodia, and that's ready early in the year. This makes it more critical that West African countries start to process. Because what's happening is that Vietnamese buyers, now with the arrival of Cambodia, they have more time. They can come to the market later. And of course, that means you need an infrastructure, because if the buyers don't come to the market early, you need to store the material in order to preserve the quality. It also means that it's likely that there will be greater port congestion, and we're seeing that at the moment. Ports in Ivory Coast, Conakry in the Republic of Guinea, we're seeing that kind of congestion arising because buyers have come late and they've come together. So this is a real structural change in the industry that necessitates greater emphasis on origin-based processing. And it's not the only reason for origin-based processing. So let's have a quick look at Nigeria in the world cashew market. Nigeria has become a more and more important player over the years. Let's have a look at some of the numbers. So first of all, Nigeria is about 5% of world production. If you look at the countries around, the countries in the region, Ghana 3%, Benin 4%, Togo 1%. The big player worldwide, and the big player in West Africa, of course, is Ivory Coast. You can see on the map the trend in production overall in the major producers in West Africa is upward, but it is beginning to slow a little in the last 3 or 4 years. That growth is beginning to slow a little. It was very fast up to that point. We can also see that the Côte d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, dominates production in West Africa. It dominates production throughout Africa. It is the largest producer in the world. But Nigeria has also been growing. Now, the estimates of the Nigerian crop, there's a range of estimates, as you would expect. And we think this year it's a pretty good crop. We think it's somewhere between 300 and 325,000 tons. Some people would say it's a little bit lower than that. It is quite difficult to put a number on it at this stage because it's hard to distinguish between now in May and what may evolve over the next 6 to 8 weeks. It's also hard to distinguish what may be coming in across borders and what is actually produced in Nigeria. But as it stands, Nigeria is the sixth largest producer in the world, third in Africa, with a 5% share of world production and a very fast growth rate at 9%. I mentioned a few moments ago that the world growth rate was 6.7%. That's slowing down. Nigeria has been growing faster than the world rate at 9% over the last 10 years. And that's obviously very positive news, particularly when it's combined with an improvement of the quality, as we've seen. Let's have a closer look. And as you can see, pretty strong trend, 9.4% over 10 years, 7.3% over the last 5 years, with a slightly lower crop in 21 and 22 contributing to that. But I think we can look forward to maintenance of these production levels. We've also seen a major improvement in quality, and that's primarily due to the arrival of new varieties. We've also seen some confusion in terms of crop estimates, and that makes it difficult for buyers. It makes it difficult for investors, and it would be good news if we could get more accurate crop estimations early in the season. The influence of cross-border trade, particularly with the ban on the export of RCN from Benin, means that product is coming across the border into Nigeria rather than, as it used to do, exiting through the port in Benin. This is a factor. It may be of benefit to Nigerian processors. It is, of course, illegal in Benin, but it's not illegal in Nigeria. Generally speaking, positive trend on production, looking for that to continue. We'll have a look at Nigeria in terms of location. So I think there are three factors to take into account when we look at location. Essentially, Nigeria is located between the major consuming regions of the world. We have the United States and North America, we have Western Europe. Absolutely ideal in the sense of being close to access those markets, in common with other cashew producers in the region, of course. Secondly, I think it's important to point out that there is a developing domestic market in Nigeria. And unlike neighboring countries, I mean, quite apart from the size of Nigeria and the population, there is a developing consumption of cashew kernels. It's been there for some time. But if we compare to smaller countries in the region in terms of population, at least like Ivory Coast or Ghana, there's much more likelihood of the development of an important domestic market in Nigeria than there is in those countries. A domestic market's really essential for fast development of cashew processing. And I think that's one of the reasons that we have seen so many high quality, smaller units with good products, consumer packed, emerge in Nigeria than we have seen emerge elsewhere. Looking at processing. So I'm going to compare the Nigerian progress in processing to other countries, primarily in Africa. So the capacity, and this would be the installed capacity, which, let's face it, is notional. The installed capacity has grown to third place in Africa. The new factories are mainly large-scale factories. They're mainly mechanized. They are likely to be efficient, although there are some problems operating them. Nigeria has developed its processing capacity without subsidies, without trade barriers. So in Ivory Coast, we have a $480 per ton subsidy on the export of cashew kernels for all processors. In Benin, we have a ban on the export of raw cashew nuts. As you know, we don't have any of those factors present in Nigeria. So this development has been essentially without a huge degree of support from the government. And that's in line with government policy to support the sector without necessarily supporting individual businesses in that way. When we look at the utilization of capacity, and this is a key measure, the utilization of capacity is a key measure when we consider how efficient a processing industry is. And we see that right across the sector, the utilization of processing is not particularly impressive. Even the highest figures in Mozambique, 78% of the processing capacity utilized. In Nigeria, I'm calculating that at around about 44%. So that means that the sector could process more than double what it currently processes. And this is where one of the reasons we come to the conclusion that this marketing issues. We see the issues as three areas: marketing, access to working capital, and management of factories and generally of cashew businesses. The second metric that we use to assess the progress of a cashew sector is the percentage of the crop that's processed. And again, as you can see, Nigeria is quite low in that respect, but so are most countries across the sector. Benin about 35%, Ivory Coast 29%. These are the most successful West African cashew countries in that respect. So we're not seeing a huge efficiency either in the factories or in the percentage of the crop that's processed in any individual countries. Nigeria is about 7th of the top 11 in terms of the proportion of the crop that's processed in the country. There's work to be done, clearly. Let's have a look at Nigeria in the world cashew market and focus on marketing. So the chart on the left shows cashew kernels imports into the European Union from Nigeria. I've taken the import figures because they're easier from comparison purposes and they tend to be more up to date. So what we can see, first of all, is that there has been a very positive upward trend. Last year, the European Union recorded imports of 2,636 tons from Nigeria, which on the face of it is a good progression. And exports have certainly gone from very low levels less than a decade ago, when there was virtually no imports into Europe from Nigeria. But when then on the right we look at the share of the market, and we see in the light green is the share of all African countries, up to 20.5, just under 20.5% currently. And we compare that to Nigeria's share, which is less than 1.5%. And this is where I'm coming to the conclusion that Nigerian exports to Europe particularly have underperformed African averages. If the African average is 20.5% and Nigeria is less than 1.5%, clearly there's an issue there that needs to be addressed and can be addressed. So the key points for me for Nigeria within the world cashew market are, first of all, production and quality have improved. Production has increased, quality has improved. Secondly, there are location and trading environment advantages. And by trading environment, I mean that we look in a lot of other cashew countries and we see a lot of ad hoc policy, regulatory interventions that may not necessarily work for the sector. We saw this in Ivory Coast last year. We're seeing it in Benin in the last 3 years, that these state interventions in the sector may not have actually been positive. And that, despite the fact that some people would say we need more support in Nigeria, the lack of some of these interventions has actually been a positive factor. However, the export of raw cashew nuts still dominates the sector. Kernels export is underperforming. Processing is well below capacity. So if you build a cashew factory, you would like to think that you would get up to about 85% of your notional installed capacity. We're nowhere near that for most factories in Nigeria, up to last year at least, but it is improving. Support for the sector is low. Regulation of the sector is low. How we manage that? Well, it can be to our advantage as a processor, or in some cases, it may be a disadvantage. But we're not necessarily seeing any inherent competitive disadvantage for Nigeria in the market as it stands. There is a good opportunity there for processors in Nigeria. So let's move on, and I wanted to talk a little bit more generally about cashew processing in order to discuss the general issues around how to move forward. And I thought let's have a look at cashew processing, what makes it successful and what are the challenges. So when we look at, first of all, what are the products? Well, the key product is obviously cashew kernels. Cashew kernels are widely used, usually about 80% in the West for snacks, and that's in India a much broader range of products, sweets, cooking, and snacks. 22 to 25% yields. Less valuable products, but nonetheless essential products, cashew shell, from which cashew nut shell liquid is removed to make chemicals and to make biomass for the generation of energy. That's about 70 to 75% of the weight, much less of the value, of course. And the testa, that skin, the inner skin on the cashew kernel, depending on the variety, that's between 2 and 7%. And that's used as fertilizer, it's used in dyes, and in some cases it's used in animal feed. So the first thing to note on the products is very little wastage in the processing of cashews. You have the high value kernels, lower value cashew nut shell liquid and shell meal, and of course the testa. Everything can be used, everything has an economic value. What are the factors for successful processing? So we developed these factors over many years. I've been lucky enough to coach a lot of cashew factories over the years in many different countries. And this is essentially what we notice. First and most basic thing is a good quality raw material. It should be properly dried, it should be properly stored, ready to be processed. Secondly, and particularly for an origin-based processor where you have maybe a 3 to 4 month window to buy the raw material, you need to be well financed. You need good competitive levels of working capital. You need competitive finance cost. That's essential. Then we look at the process. A good factory is producing a minimum of 75% of whole cashews. So that's given good quality raw material, that should turn into about 75% of wholes. Therefore, for the balance, somewhere between 20 and 25%, a market is needed. A market is needed for pieces and a market is needed for lower grades. Now, the upper end of the wholes can be around 90%. So some factories, yes, even mechanized factories, have managed to get their yield of wholes up to around 90%. Not easy, but it can be done. And that reduces the need for markets for pieces and lower grades. But unfortunately, not many factories do that. So as things stand, we need to have a market for broken cashews and we need to have a market for off-color and other lower grades. Fourth factor is the availability of labor at two levels. Labor to work on the factory floor, people who will learn the skills or perhaps in some cases already have them, and that they will work in an environment that allows them to be productive. And the onus is on both sides. The onus is on the staff to learn the skills and work, and particularly to turn up for work. But the onus is also nowadays on the factory to offer good working conditions that will be attractive to workers and good working conditions that will be acceptable to buyers, particularly in markets that are becoming more and more conscious of working conditions and human rights in all kinds of factories, especially factories like cashews, the garment business. These are industries which in the past have not had a good reputation. The final two factors are really factors that are part of the setup. So first of all, choosing the right scale. So the scale must be at a level that allows you to make money, allows you to get your costs to competitive levels. That, of course, is related to how much finance you have available. You can only build a large-scale factory if you have the finance available to do that. It's also related to the supply chain and how you can access supply in that chain. So you need good quality raw material, you need enough of it at the right scale to make the factory viable, and to build that factory and to finance the raw material, you need access to capital. Far too often have we seen situations where factories have not succeeded because they haven't really considered either how much working capital they might need, or how to access it. As surprising as that sounds, it's quite common. It's particularly common in mid-sized factories that have sprung up in the last 10 years or so. And the final thing we need is good management. We need a good understanding of the process, a good understanding of the equipment, because of course this industry has changed. It used to be that you might have 5,000 people in a large cashew factory. Today, you might have less than 500 and still be able to process 10, maybe 12,000 tons a year. That's really changed. So the emphasis on management has changed from managing people to managing machines and managing process. So the understanding of the process, the understanding of food safety, and the right manufacturing care and attention in terms of food safety is important in order to meet buyers' demands. And this is all part of marketing. Being able to put all of these things in place is part of sales and marketing. By having the right scale, having the right workers, treating the workers correctly, a quality raw material, good quality kernels. These are all factors in the presentation of the story of a cashew processing unit to customers. And that storytelling is a key and highly important aspect of marketing in 2025. And it will only become more so as time goes on. Let's try and put some context on all of this. We'll have a look at processing in African countries. So you can see that we've had a sharp growth over the years. So here we have a chart with the green bars are the total processing raw cashew nut volume in Africa. The blue is West Africa, the grey is East Africa, and the orange line is the overall trend. So we're looking at about 20% growth per annum. Processing capacity has increased in most countries. What we've seen is, though, is a big increase in this partial processing, the processing of Burma kernels, as they call them. That's kernels that are only processed to the point just before peeling, then they're dried and they're exported. And unfortunately, today, African countries' biggest customer for cashew kernels is Vietnam. And the biggest product is the unpeeled Burma kernels. I was looking at figures this morning for Mozambique. In 2024, 52% of Mozambique's cashew kernels went as unpeeled product to Vietnam. A lot of value addition is being left behind in that type of business. So if we look at the percentage of the crop processed in Africa, we see very strong progress over the years, and that last year was up to as much as 20%. If we look at the utilization of factories that have been installed, again, we see no country really, maybe the exception is Mozambique, but no country's processing is getting anywhere close to the kind of 85% that you'd expect. 70% in Tanzania, but bear in mind, there is a very, very small level of processing of cashews in Tanzania. So what has been changing processing? And it's key really to understand that cashew processing has changed enormously in the past decade. And it's changed for a number of key factors. Just looking at the two pictures on the screen, the upper picture, that was taken in India in what was considered then an advanced cashew factory in 2008. And then here's a picture of an Ivorian cashew factory doing the same job in 2022. It's quite a change. And that's been driven by a number of factors. I suppose the root of all of this really was the rising labor cost in Vietnam. The rising labor cost in Vietnam gave rise to develop more cost competitive measures and greater technology. And that technology, because it's available worldwide for export from Vietnam, has changed the way we process cashews. So we have the growth of technology driven by labor cost, and then this buyer's requests and buyers' concerns particularly on food safety. So mechanized processing is much more food safe than manual processing, and by buyers' requirements for quality management systems. Might I just ask people to check their microphones to make sure they're muted? We're getting quite a bit of sound on the line. So please, if you're not talking, please mute your microphone. So what we've seen is a development of technology driven by innovation on buyers' concerns on the one side, looking for better quality management systems. That means systems like HACCP or systems like BRC, and by buyers' concerns on food safety. And those, although they originally tended to come from European countries, you will now find that India, China, and a whole range of other consuming countries have very strict requirements in terms of food safety. This has changed the sector. It is here to stay. So we're seeing a very different processing methodology than we saw in the past. And we would go into that in any capacity building program that we would do. It has brought a number of questions to the fore. So let me first of all just give you an example of how cashew processing is in Vietnam. So we have essentially in Vietnam four types of cashew factory. The bulk of cashew processing is in large or very large, food safe, low risk, large scale factories. And these are factories of 20,000 tons capacity plus, and I mean plus up to 100,000 tons capacity factories. Very mechanized, very large. Many of them contract out their, what we call crudely the dirty end of the process, the shelling. And that's contracted in some cases out to small factories. There is risk there. There's food safety risk there. There's risk in human rights. And this is something that shouldn't be repeated in African factories. We also have a third type of factory, which is a full process, smaller factory, often adding more value, often, as you can see in the picture, doing a consumer packed product. And then we have the fourth type, which is a factory that tends to buy from the others, sometimes buying from these risky factories, sometimes buying from the smaller factories and simply packing. And what they're doing is they're adding a perhaps cleaning and packing, but what they're really adding is a food safety aspect to the overall production. Now, this structure has created some big issues, and we'll have a look at some of the issues around the world. First of all, in India, what we're seeing in India is a move away from this manual processing, which is still largely present in India. We're seeing a move to mechanization. But this level of investment has come slowly. So what we see in India today is new factories, particularly in the north of the country, that operate on imported raw cashew nuts. They're mechanized, modern, low levels of employment, high levels of efficiency. But many factories still exist that are dependent on manual labor, and there are many factories that are a mix. Now, those factories are not necessarily poor factories. Some of them are really excellent factories. They just have the mechanized model. And the main impact of that is not on food safety or on quality. The main impact of that is on cost. There's simply a higher cost of processing without the use of mechanization, particularly as the Indian economy develops. Wages rise, costs rise. Vietnam has already invested in mechanization. As I said, most of the factories, especially the large factories, are mechanized. But what we saw in Vietnam over the years is a sector that developed on price. So Vietnam became dominant. Remember, 89% share of the US market, 74% share of the European market. That was largely achieved through lower prices. And we saw years of lower prices, 2022, 2023, and the early part of 2024. Now we're in a situation where costs have risen, prices have risen, but not by as much as necessary. And the profit margins in Vietnam have become very tight. The supply chain aspect, taxes in African countries on RCN, higher freight, higher costs on raw material, bearing in mind that almost 90% of the raw material is imported on the one hand, and on the other hand, higher costs of export, higher costs of freight, and requirements from buyers mean that this model is becoming under extreme profit margin pressure. In that, there may be an opportunity, of course. If we look in African countries, we're seeing different kinds of issues. So the Vietnamese are dealing with their processing success. India is dealing with modernization of processing, but has a huge domestic market. In Africa, we're looking at issues around about installation of equipment and formulation of factories. We're looking around at issues, essentially a lack of working capital is a key issue for many African processors. We're looking at poor linkages to processors. And this is something that's sometimes forgotten, but shouldn't be. And that is that many cashew factories still buy from traders, they still buy at random, they still do not have good linkages to the farmers that supply them. And this increases cost, it decreases quality, and more than anything, it increases risk. So part of a good marketing policy should be marketing in the supply chain as well as marketing in the export chain. And that means better linkages to farmers, working with farmers, traceable supply chains, and in the longer run, sustainable supply chains. So within African factories, the issues we notice are dealing with poorly installed equipment, poorly selected equipment on some occasions, lack of working capital, lack of supply chain linkages, and struggles for good managers. So people often, and you will read many, many articles about low productivity in African cashew factories. I don't think that's the case. I think what's really lacking is good training of workers and good management. And I think that's a key issue, and it's something that we can fix with good training, with good selection of managers. And in Brazil, so Brazil is in a little bit of trouble on its cashew processing, but not for any other reason than Brazilian production has collapsed over the last decade. If this industry is going to thrive, if this industry is going to advance, it needs African cashew processing. It needs origin-based cashew processing, because that is what buyers want. How we do that and how we engage with the buyers will determine the future of the sector. So how can Nigerian cashew factories be competitive in the world market? First of all, accepting that it's going to be very difficult to match the Vietnamese simply on price. So if we're looking at a cost of processing per ton of raw cashew nuts in Vietnam around about $200 a ton, everything included, it's going to be really difficult to match that. I'm looking at cashew factories in West Africa, the best cashew factories in West Africa, with a cost of processing around about $400 per ton of raw material. Okay, the cost of getting the raw material to the factories, much lower. But still there is a gap to be filled. Let's have a look at some of the factors that are important for competitiveness. First of all, modern African cashew factories, including those in Nigeria, tend to be modern, mechanized, and larger in scale. They tend to be better certified because they're new, because they're put there with these things in mind, with certifications like BRC, with certifications for supply chain in place. What we find in the major suppliers at the moment, particularly in Vietnam, is that the certification is not genuine. So a key factor is, from a buyer's point of view, is the certification genuine? How do we know it's genuine? And from a processor's point of view, how can we achieve that certification? Secondly, let's look at location. And I mentioned Nigeria's location, but I just take the general location picture because this applies across West Africa. So if we look at this journey from West African countries to Vietnam, For each ton of kernels, that's about 81,000 kilometers of a journey. And then the material travels back to Europe, which is this example, another 17,000. 80% or 75% in 2024, 80% in 2023 of European imports were bought in this way. Do European consumers know that every time they buy a cashew kernel, they may be buying a product that's traveled almost 100,000 kilometers to the market? Contrast that with the product processed in West Africa. The distance traveled, I calculated it based on shipment from Lagos, it's 7.5 times shorter. There are 70% fewer handling operations of the product, and the carbon footprint is reduced. And there is quite a lot of research being done on this at the moment that will put this into numbers. Are we telling this story in our marketing? I'm not sure we are. Is this story important to consumers and buyers, particularly in Europe? Absolutely it is. And not only is it important, but from 2028, it'll be part of the European Union law. Location then offers these permanent advantages. Not only is the carbon footprint lower, but so is the freight cost lower. The lead times on orders are cheaper. So that means that a buyer needs less stock. If you order material from Vietnam, it might take up to 45 days to prepare it and deliver it. If you order that same product from a West African producer, that time might be as low as 15 days. That means you need less stock in your warehouse, you need less finance, it's got a longer shelf life, and you're generally dealing with fresher, better cashew kernels. Most Europeans have never tasted a fresh cashew kernel. Most of the product that they consume is more than 100 days old. That can change by dealing with African suppliers. But do we tell that story? I'm not sure we do. Traceability in supply chain, again, this is a key consideration. So traceability is about risk management. Traceability is not an artificial requirement placed to make life more difficult. It is about risk management, and it's a key factor for the future. Buyers, especially European buyers, are looking for a sustainable supply chain with long-term solutions. So that means on the one hand, make linkages to the farmers that grow the product, and on the other, make linkages to the market where you sell it. It means real farm gate traceability. As I say, this is about risk mitigation. Genuine supply chain certification, and I've already said that African processors tend to offer a genuine certification, whether that's their HACCP system, a BRC system, whether it's organic or fair trade, they do tend to offer genuine certification. So when we look at this, we look at a situation in which the bulk of the world's cashew trade, the 3 or even 3.5 million tons of the intercontinental, because that's what it is, intercontinental raw cashew nut trade, loses its identity. It's a trader chain. It's very old-fashioned in its structure. It's about evacuation. It's not about quality, traceability, or risk management. This is a key competitive advantage for origin-based processing in Nigeria. For European buyers, and this is specifically for European buyers, so under new legislation in Europe, the guidelines on the responsible supply chain management, which will become the law in 2028 for large companies, and it will extend to all companies after that. If we look at, going back to one of my first comments, that the structure of our supply chain based on smallholders is a key factor in the way it works. It can also be an advantage in terms of showing support to smallholders, showing a social impact. We can say with confidence that buying African cashew kernels directly improves farm family incomes. And those are farm family incomes of smallholders, often struggling to survive. So it's part of our story when we talk about African cashew processing. How we tell that story is part of our marketing effort. We'll have a quick look at the other side of the coin, the raw cashew nut trade. And it has been growing. And if we look at the raw cashew nut trade over the last 10 years, it's grown from about 600,000 tons to Vietnam and India. Sorry, 600,000 tons to Vietnam and 1 million tons almost to India. It's grown to 2.5 million tons to Vietnam last year. And in 2023, a record 2.8 million tons traded into Vietnam. That trade has grown at around about 10% in recent years. Now, this point of growth, of course, is Cambodia to Vietnam trade. I'll talk about that again in a minute. So what we're seeing here is the key factors. We're seeing increasing demand for raw cashew nuts. We're seeing production far from the processing centres. And this means we have a lot of traders involved. They are absolutely essential for this industry because they bring the money, which makes the industry work. They bring the expertise in sourcing, quality, and shipping that makes it work. This trade has exploded. And if you look, where does India buy its cashew nuts? Well, you can see India likes to buy in Tanzania, Nigeria, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, as well as a host of other countries. If we look at Vietnam, pretty similar, but Vietnam has Cambodia. So if we look last year, 2.4 million tons into Vietnam, imported raw cashew nuts, about 800,000 tons of that came from Cambodia. India, 1.1 million tons, almost all of that came from African countries. Telling the story of how this works and the alternative, origin-based processing, is a very strong story to convince buyers to change. If we look at the traded prices for raw cashew nuts over the years, we see that it's very volatile. What we see actually, which is interesting, when we get up as far as 2023, despite a huge increase and then a collapse, we see that actually prices return to about the same level where they were in 2014. That's very little progress. We see increased demand, we see price volatility, we see a market that is not behaving in a modern fashion. This works to a point, but it's not sustainable, it's full of contradictions, and ultimately it will cause major problems in the sector. If the trend is towards traceable, sustainable supply chains, where does this fit? Let's have a look at cashew consumption and the kernels trade. And it's pretty good news in the general trends. But what do cashew kernel buyers want? They want a quality product. They want a short supply chain. That is not what we've been talking about in the raw cashew nuts business. We've been talking about a long, complex supply chain. What they want is a resilient, diversified, short supply chain. What they've got is a complex, fragile, concentrated supply chain, almost directly the opposite of what they would like to have. They want food safety, they want traceability and transparency, which can only be delivered by origin-based processing. They want price stability, and they want compliance with labor laws, and they want compliance with environmental laws. And this cannot be underestimated in its future. So when we look at the key factors for buyers, we can see that many of these things can only be delivered by processing at origin. Cashews processed in Nigeria can deliver a shorter supply chain. They can deliver a traceable and transparent chain, and they can deliver environmental compliance in a way that Vietnamese suppliers cannot. They can deliver other things. They can certainly deliver quality, food safety, price stability, but they cannot deliver these three factors. The trend in consumption is pretty good. Consumption has been growing at about 4.9%. You might remember earlier I said that production was growing at almost 6%, so we've seen a little bit of an opening out there. The top four markets account for 82% of demand: US, India, the European Union, and China. So when we look at the global trends in consumption, we see India, the blue bars, fairly steady, an interruption during COVID. We see European demand has been steadily growing for many years and will continue to grow, and it's been growing actually more quickly recently. We see Indian demand growing quickly, and we see US demand somewhat erratic in its growth, but nonetheless growing. If we work this back, we see a couple of big step ups, but actually it's growing steadily at relatively low levels. And looking at the consumption share, just estimating for last year, we don't have the final figures. India was last year about 33%, a little bit down on the average of 37. The US about 20, Europe 19, and China about 12%. So there is a little bit of a difference there. Sharp people may have picked up on that, because in this one I've included secondary processing, so roasted and salted and consumer packs. Let's have a look at the European market. So first factor about the European market is that it has been growing quickly and steadily in recent years. And you can see up to 2023, we see the European market, particularly the EU market, growing steadily, and other countries too. If we look at that market, who are the major importers? We see the Netherlands, which redistributes a lot of those cashew kernels to other countries. Germany and the UK would be the three big importers in Europe. European market, to note, is mostly a market for whole grade cashews, and this is one of our challenges in marketing. How can we get markets for brokens? If we're breaking 20% and Europe only buys 12% brokens, then obviously we need another market. And that's a key factor. Now, if we look at the US market in a moment, we'll see that's slightly different. Vietnam continues to dominate the European market, but in 2023, when these stats were calculated based on Africa had 17%, in the early part of this year, Africa has 20%. So that's moving in the right direction. So strong growth in Europe, and the key points are second largest market, highly dependent on Vietnam. It is actually the fastest growing market for African cashew kernels, 20% share in 2024. It's mainly for white hulls, so that means for Europe it's important that we reduce breakage and we reduce scorching, or we find other markets for them. We've seen a fallback in 2022, but since the inflation has started to come under control, we start to see the market becoming more and more resilient and greater growth. Quick look at the US market. Again, steady if slower growth, dominated by Vietnam. The growth in imports is only around about 2%. And for natural products, that means cashew kernels that aren't roasted or packed in consumer packs, that's less than 1%. Key points about the US market: slow growth, high dependence on Vietnam, low share for Africa, diverging style, so they're going more for roasted product, more for packed product in recent years than other markets are. There is a greater use of brokens and scorched kernels, so this means 20-25%, and that's quite positive in terms of the function of the US market in any marketing package. Last year, I just wanted to put some context on the US market last year. US imports last year were up by 24%. It looks like that was largely about building an inventory ahead of the imposition of import tariffs. US actual consumption, if we look at supermarket level, was up by a very healthy 7 to 10%, but imports were up by something like 24%. And I think that was about building inventories ahead of this discussion on US import tariffs. So our two key markets where we have competitive advantage, Europe and the United States, both growing, both very, very different from each other, but both may have functional purpose for the Nigerian cashew sector. Talk about some trends. We just have a quick look at some of the trends. And the first slide is the really interesting, I think, from a general point of view. So looking at this, I've charted here production in blue and consumption in green. And what you can see emerging is after steady growth, we see a production surge from Cambodia. But this is where we started to get production way ahead of consumption. So in this period, and it will include this year, 2025, supply is greater than demand. And that was one of the reasons we saw such low prices in this period from 2022, when we saw the slowdown, the economic slowdown, the results really of the war by Russia on Ukraine. We saw an economic slowdown and we started to see this supply surplus emerge. That's continued, but up to last year when the crop was a little bit less, low prices started to have an impact and we saw a situation where that was corrected. So whereas supply was greater than demand, prices had gone too low, and last year we saw that corrected. And so far this year, those prices have been pretty much maintained over the year. So we're looking at a market where supply has grown faster than demand since Cambodia entered the market in such a big way. 2019, really that impacted in 2021. That's been somewhat under control last year due to a lower crop. How will things look as we go forward? Well, it looks like, based on a forecast that we've done, it looks like that production, the green dotted line going forward to 2031, will exceed demand during that period. So the red line is demand over a period. So what you can see is that 2014 through to 2020, supply and demand very closely matched. Then we came into 2021 when Cambodia's production started to influence the market, and we see a supply surplus emerging. Now, if we project that forward, on the current trend, production will continue to exceed demand all the way up to the next decade. The orange line is a more optimistic forecast. So what that's saying is that the lower prices that we'd seen will stimulate demand, in which case, rather than demand continuing at a surplus, we would around 2030 start to see demand and supply match again. But I think for now, we need to assume that based on normal production every year, not taking into account any impact of particularly bad growing conditions, assuming a decent crop, we're going to be looking at a surplus. And that makes our actions in terms of our sales and marketing all the more important. And if we look at price, this is a chart of cashew prices going back many years. It goes back as far as 2006. And when we look at that, what do we see? We see huge volatility of price. We see a low price of $2.15 way back in 2008, but $2.40 more recently. We see a high of $5.20. This is all for WW320s. And we see 1, 2, 3 really big price spikes, but we also see that they've been sometimes followed by really low prices. 205 back in 2006, 215, and more recently 240. So many people thought that low prices were a thing of the past when we got to 520 in 2017, but they were not. They came back very quickly. So one of the key things for processors, for the sector generally, is surviving price volatility. Surviving price volatility is about good sales and marketing, having good relationships with customers, avoiding defaults of contract when the market's low, and of course, keeping contracts when the market's high. This volatility is not likely to go away anytime soon. And we need to be in a position to manage it. And similarly, when we look at the raw cashew nut market, when we look at raw cashew nuts markets, we see again not quite as extreme price volatility, but we do see quite a lot of price volatility. And if you just track the red line, the dotted red line is an index that we calculate based on an average of £48 over the years. And what you can see that it is also very volatile. So processors are faced with the other aspect of the challenge, and that is managing their supply chain, managing price volatility in supply. So it's on both sides, price volatility on the supply chain, price volatility in the market. And managing that is about building good relationships, and that is also part of good marketing approach. So summarizing it then, the key issues in consumption: traceable and transparent supply chains, responsible and sustainable sourcing, food safety, and particularly maximum residue levels. That means maximum chemical residue levels. This is becoming a bigger and bigger issue. Good storytelling in marketing and conscience-driven consumption. Consumers want to know, where did my product come from? Who benefited? Who suffered by this product? What's the story behind it? So good storytelling in marketing is absolutely essential in the future. We're still looking at increasing consumption in developing countries, and we're looking at diversification in the applications. So this may well give us more opportunities to sell some of the broken and some of the off-color kernels. The other side, let's look at some of the trends in production. Origin-based processing, that means processing close to where the product grows, is becoming more and more of a factor. That means building better supply chain linkages with the people that grow the cashew nuts. That's becoming more and more a factor. Greater use of technology in processing, including mechanization. The impact of climate change is becoming a factor, and we're more than likely to see that. We've more than likely already seen it in some cases, but we're going to see more and more influence of climate change on production in the coming years. Reduction in the use of chemical inputs. This is important because this is where buyers are going. So rather than looking for improved yields through the application of chemicals, we need to look at other aspects. And I think there will be a trend toward consumer packing at origin. I think that is already started, and I think it provides interesting opportunities, particularly in Nigeria, where I think the capacity to meet that demand is already in place. So to finish, what might the cashew nut market look like in 10 years from now? Well, this is what I think. I think in West Africa, production growth will have slowed down, mostly on the impact of climate change. But I also think that most of the cashew nuts that are grown in West Africa will be processed in West Africa. East African production will also have grown, but processing will still be limited. Vietnam will be processing less product, but it'll be doing more value-added product, more roasted, more consumer packs for export. Cambodia will by then be the largest producer. And it will be a significant processor, but probably most of its product will still go to Vietnam to be processed. Looking at the consumers, the North American market, I think, will be about the same size. Maybe it'll grow at 1% per annum. Europe will grow more quickly and will become the second largest consuming area after India. India's production will not grow quick enough to keep up with its demand. It will still need to import vast volumes of raw cashew nuts, and that's going to be a problem, because if West Africa is processing its cashew nuts, where is India going to buy the raw cashew nuts? India will be a net importer, but it will still be fast growing. And China will be the world's largest market for cashew nut kernels 10 years from now, in my view, and that's based on the current trends that we're seeing. There is opportunity here. It needs to be taken. The greatest opportunity is in adding value in the countries where cashews are produced. Can Nigeria be a driver of that? Can Nigeria be a driver of the market and of processing development over the next decade? That for me is the single biggest question. So thank you for participating today. We're going to have some Q&A shortly. If you want to look at these marketing challenges, if you want to improve profit margins, if you want to select the right markets and build a sustainable customer portfolio, if you want to manage that supply chain risk, talk to IEOM. We'd be really happy to work with you on capacity building programs and training to improve cashew marketing and market access. Thank you very much indeed. Let me hand you back to Tim.
Wow, thank you very much, Jim, for such incredible presentation. I was just thinking that we ought to have given you a kind of a break for your more or less a breather for you to take a sip of water and but in a just one bit you've given us a very wonderful presentation, which I believe all the participants were we will see that indeed the presentation was very rich, data driven, and in depth into the cashew sector. I believe that for those who are participating in this special webinar, will have a great deal of maybe the area of clarification or questions that you need, clarification. It will be great if you can post that on our chat so that we can, help to, clarify those areas. Once again, I want to thank you very much, Jim, for this presentation. Indeed, Nigeria has a great deal of opportunity to be a driver. And for those who are participating, you can also see those areas in which Jim has really stressed, especially the value addition that is quite needed, because currently the state and the status of the cashew is more or less, raw, being exported. So he has really highlighted the need for value addition, even for the fact that the stock capacity of some of those factories that we have, those new factories have not been, fully utilized. We still have opportunity for such a utilization. And that is why, as an institute, we are trying to bring this awareness, collaborating with, stakeholders to see how we can better, build that capacity and also utilize, those, factories. And we believe that Nigeria has a role to play, and we are the one to play that role. So thank you very much, Jim. I don't know, do we have any question from the audience? Those who are participating, do you have area that you want us to clarify? We have the time now. While we are waiting for that, yes?
Yes, I was saying if most of them want to ask the question directly, no problem too. They cannot type. And they
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. If you want to ask the question, you can just unmute your mic and ask the questions. So the panelists are here to answer this question.
Okay, let me quickly chip in here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead. Can you tell us your name?
Okay, my name is Hamza from NMT Agro Processing. We are based in Oshogbo here. We just recently set up a 40-ton per day cashew processing plant. So we are actually, what Mr. Fitzpatrick has been saying actually speaks to us. Now, the issues we have, I agree with most of what he said, but there are a few areas that I don't kind of relate with because we are on ground. Number one, the lack of regulation in the market has practically crippled the processing industry in Nigeria. And I am telling you, as somebody who is down here on the ground, most factories cannot afford to buy RCN at the price that it is going. And that is because we have too many exporters running into the market unrestricted. Sorry, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, I hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. We have too many exporters getting unrestricted access to the farm gate. Now, it makes it impossible for the local processors, to buy RCN. Now, RCN in IVC is equivalent of 1,250,000 per ton. RCN in Nigeria is equivalent of 2.250 million. That's about 1 million over. Now, when you try to calculate your cost, you realize that even when you process, you do not recover your cost of buying the RCN, without factoring the cost of processing. You don't even recover the cost of buying the RCN because the kernel market is fixed. People in IVC, they have about $150, $180 incentive from the government. And it is because of the money they plow back from the tariff they put on the sale of RCN. Now that incentivizes processing. If in Nigeria today, we do not regulate the market, you see, last year, one factory closed down. This year, 2 factories have closed down. Like they've closed down completely. And that is because it is impossible to operate in an environment where, number one, there's no regulation. Number two, there's no support. Our factory here has the capacity to handle, we are supposed to have a workforce of about 350, 400 at full capacity. But right now, we're not even doing up to 10%. Then you have issues of power. The cost of power is impossible. The cost of power is impossible. We get bill of almost 15 million naira every month, use or don't use the power, whether we operate or not. So it is nearly, there's no way we can operate the sector and operate it properly without having the government not just marginally involved, but actively involved the way it's done. Because processing in Ivory Coast is ramping up because of, number one, there are restrictions to export. The first 3 or 4 months between January and April, you can't export from IVC. And that's because it allows the price to go down naturally, though there's a cap. It cannot go above that cap. Now, the processors can get access to very good quality kernels. But we here, if you want to go into the market, you have to compete with, and then another one is the cost of the access to what's it called? Working capital.
Okay, so Mr. Hamza, thank you very much. I think you've
let me just finish this because it's very critical.
Just
working capital.
Rand, I want to rand off so that you can,
Yes. So the working capital, the Indian and the Vietnamese get it at less than 5%. We get it at 41% here. We get it at 41%. So it makes it almost impossible to operate. So I don't know if there's any kind of and then at market access. He's already said that we also need market access. We don't have market access. Too many obstacles in our ways. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hamza. Yes, the floor is open to Mr. Jim. And the perspective from Mr. Udofe.
Well, I didn't really hear a question in there. So that's a description of the constraints of a business. Really, I think what our subject is about marketing and about market. By the way, the subsidies in Ivory Coast will be withdrawn next year. There are also high costs of electricity in those countries. The issue of the window for buying for processors, this has been very successful, and it has worked in Ghana. It's less relevant in Ivory Coast actually because of the size of the crop, but it is relevant in other countries. It's worked in Ghana, it's worked in Mozambique, and it seems to be a very good idea to give processors, I would say, minimum 2 months, possibly 3 months in which to purchase their raw material. It has to be carefully managed though, because it can of course impact the price at the farm gate. And obviously we don't want farmers to get less than they should get. And obviously we don't want farm prices to go too low, because that would encourage a reversal of the trend. I think it's not really likely, on what I understand, and obviously you know Nigeria better than I do, but as I understand it, it's very unlikely that the Nigerian government would subsidize the industry. It's very unlikely that the Nigerian government would introduce those kinds of supports, but perhaps an opportunity to, I would say, a minimum 2 months of a window for the procurement of raw cashew nuts by processors would be a really, really smart idea. On the area of finance, I'll tell you about a couple of deals that we did over the last couple of years, and both of them involved using buyers as leverage for finance. One involved prepayment by buyers based on a contract, and based on putting goods into a warehouse, putting the RCN into a warehouse and financing against them. In other words, using the raw cashew nuts as collateral. And that worked very well. That was with a US buyer. Another option we tried, and it also worked, was to use a contract. Now, it wasn't as effective because you still had to pay a significant local interest rate, but it was reduced interest rate. So sometimes the buyers are not used as part of the funding mechanism. I think also that it's important that that businesses who struggle with constraints, as has been outlined, and sometimes when you hear the constraints, and I appreciate the constraints, but sometimes you wonder, well, why are people in the cashew business at all? But then you look at cases that's working, and you start to look, well, how does this work? What makes it work? And marketing plays a key part in that. So I think it is, Mr. Hams's points are very well noted, and unfortunately I'm familiar with most of those things, but I think that it's a very good idea to mention them anyway today. I think that there are some ways around them, not around them all, but around some, and a lot of those involve using the buyers. But I do think that it would be constructive of the government to consider some form of a suspension of export in the early part of the year in order to give processors an opportunity to buy. Back to you, Dennis.
Okay, thank you very much for that view, and for also sharing some of the insights
Hello?
regarding
Hello.
the
Oh, hello.
Yeah, Dennis,
yes,
I think I need to say something there.
yes, go ahead.
Okay. Sure, sir, go
Hamza,
ahead, sir.
okay, Hamza, thank you for that insightful information. You know, there is a disconnect between the government and the processors. The disconnect in the sense that when some of these laws are made, like in terms of regulation, like Jim said, the stakeholders are not carried along. We are quite aware that the Royal Material Research Development Council is promoting a bill in the National Assembly for 30% value additions to product before export. Yes, a good one. But what's the duration? they don't they just do it and want to implement it immediately, which should not be very good for our economy and for local processors. So what I think I want to appeal to us is that let's see, because we as an institute, we are doing a press release and we're also talking to the relevant agencies about that. They should not show an unconcerned attitude, whereas they want to boost export. According to Nigerian Export Promotion Council, they want to double export. You can't stay at home and allow some obnoxious bills to come up and you double export. So I want to appeal to Jim at this stage that Jim should also look at other possibilities in terms of financing, of helping processors in Nigeria. Like he has talked about credit inventory system. We as an institute, we are working on seeing what we can do in Port Harcourt, the only airport, to see where we can have a warehouse we can be in charge of. When you drop your cargo and it's insured for, some bonded warehouses are coming up that you can get financing from there. So this is something that we'll be doing regularly, and we want to see how we can get some support from Jim, because Jim, if the cashew nut from Nigeria is not properly prepared, we will not be able to export them for consumption outside. So also want to seek your support for international development agencies and countries that purchase from Nigeria to see what they can do, not only in terms of just direct financing, training on hardship, and the rest of them, global gap, etc. Thank you.
Could I just mention something, if I may? What I think is a key thing when we want to talk to governments and if we want to talk to institutions, for example, social impact investors or development organizations, it's a key thing that we tell our story. That sounds a little bit glib when I say tell our story, but it's a marketing term. How do we show the benefit of this sector to the economy, to farmers, to this particular sector? How do we tell that story? And I think that maybe that is something that we need to address in detail. That what is the benefit of the Nigerian cashew processing sector to the economy? What is the benefit to farmers? What can be the long-term benefit? And I believe that those benefits would be enormous. And therefore, I think how we tell that story is really part of our marketing. So earlier I talked about marketing in the supply chain, marketing to customers. Maybe we should also consider how do we market to our own institutions and give a fair and reasonable account of the benefits of the industry. Back to you, Dennis.
Okay, thank you very much.
Hello.
There is a question that I want to also.
Oh, sorry. Mr. Dennis, can I say something quickly? Hello.
Yes, you can go ahead, guys.
On the same topic.
Thank you very
much. Is it on
much.
the same topic?
Yes, it's on the same topic.
Okay, go ahead.
My name is Mr. Bamba Adesanya. I'll keep it very brief. I'm in the oil industry, but I'm taken a lot of interest in non-oil export trades. I want to sort of put all the notions that I've heard already together and basis on what Mr. Jim has been talking about. Based on what Mr. Hamza has said, the difficulties that we're facing in country, in production and management are all part of the same marketing and storytelling that Mr. Jim has been speaking about. I don't know, I believe that there are associations and cooperatives that manage and handle production and people in the ecosystem. These associations and cooperatives can become lobbyists for these laws that are supposed to be passed in the National Assembly based on our export trade. Now, these types of meetings, lobbyings, and so need to be documented. So they form part of the story that we're going to tell to whoever it is that is buying our products. They have to see the upsides and the downsides of the things that happen in the production country, right? They have to know that these are the challenges that are faced. Regardless, the output, this is the output that we are producing, and we want to stay competitive in the international market. I don't want to go into too much conversation because I know a number of people still have things to say, but I want to imprint that the difficulties, the challenges that the actors in this space face are a very pertinent part of the storytelling and the marketing that is going to go out about the products that leave our land. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that contribution. Sorry, there is a question that's from Aderemi Kamoru. He wants to know, how do we tackle the issue of supply chain and impact of climate change in Nigeria? I think regarding, supply chain, the impacts of climate change and tackling the issue of supply chain.
I mean, they're big questions. Then before I answer or attempt to answer those two questions, let me just say I think that Mr. Bambo's contribution there is interesting and pertinent, and it occurs to me that maybe what's lacking really is a shared vision for the future of the sector. And if I've listened to his comments, I think that's kind of where logically that might be taken. But anyway, let's revert to the questions, and thank you very much for the questions. So first of all, I think that it is important to build supply chain linkages between processors and farmers. I think it's, we go back to use the same phrase, it's part of how we present our products or tell our story, is that we can identify where they come from, which farmers, which farmer groups, which cooperatives. So from a processor's point of view, the way, or one of the ways, to manage the problem of competition with the export trade in raw cashew nuts is to work closely with farmers. And that means buying from farmers, identifying farmers, helping the farmers to improve the quality and rewarding them fairly, so that we're always there as a processor for the farmers through the good times and through the bad. That's an essential part of the linkage. In order to tackle climate change, I'm not the person to ask how to tackle climate change, but I will say one thing about it, that cashews are definitely part of the solution. Planting trees, growing trees is definitely part of the solution to climate change. And cashews as a product, although they are affected by climate change, they're more resilient than some other products. So I think I won't attempt to solve the problem of climate change, but I'd like to feel that we are part of the solution in the cashew sector. Dennis.
Hello, can you hear me?
Thank you very much for that contribution.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Just hold on, Mr. Muhammad Abu.
I want to briefly say something.
Okay, go ahead and make your comment.
Okay, I want to say something to that of regulation and a link to government. We are all aware in Nigeria that there is an association who is at the apex of the activities of cashew in Nigeria, that is recognized by the federal government, which is a NCAN, National Want to Play a Superpower Role. And that is at it. Sometimes ago, we're buying raw cashew nut without drying and take it to Lagos, export it. The same body sat together and said, this is the best thing for us to do. Stone dry your cashew, pack it in jute bag, send it to Lagos before export to maintain a higher quality standard. And this same body, as I speak to you today, I'm in partnership with other development partners, drafting a strategy or policy for the industry. So if all of us can come together as a value chain, whatever value you are, whatever activities you do, then I can assure you within the next 10 years, the cashew industry in Nigeria will be a bigger one. And we'll with whatever the Mr. Jim has just analyzed. That's just my point.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dufia. You want to say something?
Let me throw something here, please.
Okay.
Okay, so I've heard quite a lot. Thank you very much. And so you see, regarding the NCAN, we have an association called CAPAN, that's Cashew Processors Association of Nigeria, and I am the secretary. We've made inroads right up to the presidency. We've had sit-downs with the ministers of agri, ministers of trade and investment. We've had sittings with practically everybody that needs to be sat with. Previous administration, present administration. And we have a policy that was drafted together with TechnoServe and GIZ. That's the German
development agency.
Yeah, development agency, GIZ. And we've been trying very hard to get this, number one, into the National Assembly, and number two, for the ministries to ratify it. Now, the biggest obstacle we've been having, because we have some of the ministries visit our factories sometimes. Now, the issues we have are there's a lot of underhand activities from these same exporters, because you see, the exporters won't sit down and watch you tell them don't export the best quality in January, February, and March. They will not sit down, just sit down and take it like that. They do everything possible to block which they've been doing, to block the passing of that policy. As we speak, we were supposed to have that presentation October 3rd last year, and it was postponed indefinitely. Indefinitely. So that's why they can send money to the farm gate, and when they put money in the farm gate, you can't compete. We know we have farms here. I'm in Osun State. We have farms all around us, but they've collected money from ETG, from all these other companies. So even if we go to do any linkage, we are just wasting our time. We just have to buy from the open market. So that is why that regulation is very critical. Very critical. The only thing Export Promotion Council does for us is just tell us, okay, we are going for this exhibition, we are going to help you get visa, then you fund your trip. And right now, there's a trip to Tunisia and there's a trip to China. But it doesn't solve our problem because, number one, we don't have access to the market. We don't have direct linkage with markets. I want to sell, okay, somebody wants to give me funds, but he wants to get an offtake contract. I don't have a buyer. If I process, I'll have to keep them in the warehouse. My capacity is almost 20,000 tons of RCN per annum. And at half capacity, I'll be spending 15 billion naira to buy just RCN. So at the end of the day, even if we are going to get funding, low interest funding, we still have to have access to the market. It goes beyond all this storytelling. We have all these things. If you go around, you have very passionate people in this industry, but the problem is the market is too unregulated. It's frustrating people out. So if there's any way that this IEOM can come in, work with us to help get this, I think it would be a big plus for us. NCAN is just rubbish. Forget about NCAN. Sorry about it. I'm a member of NCAN. We've met with Ajanaku 1,000 times. It's just a waste of time. Thank you very much.
Dr. Dufia, you are muted. Please unmute. Dr. Dufia, please unmute.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I want to thank you for being sincere because most of the thing we do at the Institute, IOM, is not about jamboree. Maybe you may not have heard about us, but we've been working on the background because we don't just want to do something for people to see. We are on the background talking to agencies, talking to people that matters so that we can tell ourselves the truth. You see, the challenge in Nigeria is that we have a lot of institutions that are not strong, but individuals are strong. Like what you said, people going to block somewhere else. We also work with ITC, with other agencies like African Development Bank. If you're able to solve this problem, it will help us a lot. Because I know if you are doing 500 metric tons of cashew nut processing, you'll be producing 250 direct jobs, which is better for us. We'll be willing to work with you. And after this program, we are also going to see how we can send our press release, let people read. Because when you advocate, one of the things we do is advocacy. When you advocate over the time, it may look as if they are paying a deaf ear, but over time, they will tend to realize that what they are saying is the truth. And I will still need your organization because we cannot work in isolation. and see what we can do to fight as a front. There was a time that I think that was during Jonathan, no, Buhari government, that there was a fiat that people should not, foreigners should not buy from the farm gates. That was not followed up. We just leave it, it was there on paper. So I think it's time we need to follow up. And let me also tell you what happened too. Some organizations gives seedlings and give money to these people in advance, which you said. So we also want to look at how can we make the people patriotic. That is to say, you also have to give them support. Like in what TechnoServe is doing in Ghana, what they call credit inventory system. If these people are sure that they will have money to even stock their cashew nut, which is part of what I still want to beg Jim, since he has this relationship and connection, to see how we can compete favorably, whether legislation or not, by also extending facilities to cooperatives within this cashew ecosystem. So it's something I pray that we can do together. I also leave your contact, fill that form. So after now, we can talk to you. And what we are doing with Jim is a continuous thing. We'll be doing it from time to time and see how I can be heard. It's pathetic that you labor so much and at the end of it, you are either not able to make ends meet, break even, or even close down. We have some factories in the East here that are shut down. So it is something that we want us to work together and see how that can be achieved. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Dofia, for that. Mr. Jim, you want to say something before we move on?
No, I think it's an interesting discussion. I think that, like as I said, that the proposal that we're bringing is a part of the solution. It's not going to solve all of the problems, but it's certainly part of the solution. And we know that because we've seen it elsewhere. But it's very interesting to listen to the discussions, and thanks to all the contributors that are coming in here. I see a hand raised, Dennis. Maybe.
Yeah, Adedeji, you are unmute yourself and let's hear your question. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you. Good afternoon, all.
Good afternoon.
I'm on transit, but I just want to quickly contribute this. I want to commend the organization. That is a well job, John. You continue, and God will give us the strength. One of my last two brothers that spoke, that NEPC will always just say they should come and go for trade mission. My brother, trade mission is key. Is one, if you are selling your market, you just have to advertise it. You just have to advertise what you are selling. So by them telling you that if there is a place, so country is doing exhibition, come on. Yes, it's not easy. I am an entrepreneur, and I can tell you, I've gone to more than 10 trade shows, both Africa and international. And immediately you may not see results, but I can bet you if you work up on it, you will definitely see results. So you can't just sit in your factory and expect sales or linkages for market to come up. You have to showcase what you have. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful deliberation. Mr. Jamie, well done. We look more for your collaboration with Nigerian farmers and processors. Thank you, sirs. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Madam Adedeji, for your contribution. And I think
I think there's a question on the board.
Okay.
Osita Maduka.
Osita Maduka. I'm here to see the question.
Okay, he said, my name is Osita Maduka from Harrod Cashew Nut, based in Abuja. We have a production factory in Enugu. So my question is that how can you guide us in overcoming the challenges in exporting our product to Europe and America? So I think Jim has to take that.
Okay.
Well, of course, that's what we're all about. I think there's a number of things that we need to consider. So first of all, question of targeting the right market. What does the market? Every market should play a function for your business, whether that be a local or domestic or national market, whether it be an international market, and wherever that market might be. What is the function that market plays in our business? Does it allow us to make better margins? Does it allow us to sell certain grades that we struggle with? Does it allow us to pay the farmers a better price? What kind of a market is it? That's the first question. How do we identify within our business whether or not we have the capacity to meet the demands of that market, and whether or not we can build our business to develop those capacities where they're missing? And I think the first thing everyone needs to do when you start to review your export effort is to take a long, hard look at your own business. And I'll add the word a long, hard, honest look at your own business. Then it's important to make sure that you concentrate on building the right presentation of the products. People in marketing call it storytelling. When I use the word storytelling, I'm just making something up, but it is actually, that's the way we market these days. Then we talk about how do we tell our story, and then we talk about the communication skills around that. Take a trade show, for example. You can go to a trade show and you can spend 3 days standing there chatting and getting nowhere. You can also go to a trade show and have, as was mentioned, a really positive experience. It's about preparation, it's about research, it's about presentation. And those are ways in which I think most businesses, certainly in my experience, most businesses can improve their capacity. I think we need to consider that it is true that the emphasis placed on sales and marketing as a key skill in a business has been underemphasized across the sector in cashews generally. And maybe that's because there are so many other challenges, as Mr. Hamsa has outlined. But I think also we should remember that when I certainly remember when I look at businesses that have been successful in Cote d'Ivoire, in Ghana, elsewhere, I see businesses that market well. I see businesses that communicate well and present themselves well. It doesn't solve every problem, but it does mean that you've got relevant markets. And let's remind ourselves of one thing. Today, in the market, WW320s from Vietnam are priced around about $2.35 per pound. WW320s from top processors in West Africa are still making prices of $2.50 or $2.55. That is marketing. And that is a huge difference in the way you approach your market and you select your customers. So it's a great question. It's a myriad of answers to that question. I'm trying to give you a flavor of some of the thoughts on it. And I think the way we would normally approach this is, number one, look at the technical capacity of the business. Number two, look at where the business stands today and encourage the managers of the business to honestly look at their own performance in these areas. Number three, look at the technical capacity and the gaps in technical capacity, for example, in the food safety certification or the manufacturing process certification. These are things that may need revision. If they do, we need to budget for it and work on that. They're not as difficult as they might appear. We need to look at grading, for example. So one of the things I always look at is are there opportunities in the grading to make specific, bespoke, specialized grades for certain customers that can improve our margins and perhaps solve our problems. So there's a whole range of technical, communication, and sales skills that need to be considered to develop this. Some of those things we can solve. Some of those things we need to bring in specialists to do that. But it's always done with an eye on the market. That's just a flavor. If you want to talk about it in more detail, let's do that. Today perhaps is not the forum, as we're now just over 3 hours online. But thanks for that question. It does actually bring to mind exactly what we're about, and that's always helpful. Dennis.
Yeah, thank you very much for your contribution and for that perspective. It's quite insightful. I don't know, do we still have maybe one question before we ask Dr. Odofia to do a kind of a wrap up before we now close. Any other question from any participant on the webinar? Okay, I think if we don't have any questions, I just want to ask Jim, what will be your thoughts regarding what will you say, the impact of the tariff that's going on with the US government? What will be the impacts on the cashew value chain, if there is any at all? Because I know each country is battling with such headwinds.
Boy, that's that's a pretty complex question at the end. All right, the impact will be, okay, I put it like this. If the tariffs end up around about this 10% level for Vietnam and others, there will be very little impact on the market. It's well within the range of volatility of cashew prices anyway. If Vietnam, which is unlikely, but if Vietnam fails to make a deal, which is, I think, what the Americans are looking for, if it fails to make a deal and they end up with 46% tariffs, which in my mind is almost impossible, but you can't rule out anything, then we will see a significant effect on the market and a great opportunity for African processors. Let's be frank about it. A problem in Vietnam is an opportunity in Africa in the cashew business. But my feeling is, and obviously this is a judgment call, my feeling is that there will be resolution. We've seen that in a number of negotiated deals so far. I think that will continue. I think it is a big sign that says we do need to develop processing at origin, because let's face it, if Vietnam stopped processing cashews today, we would all be in big trouble. Where would we go? I think this is the real lesson out of this is we need to do this ourselves. Across Africa, particularly in Nigeria, because I think there is a huge opportunity in Nigeria, but we need to learn from things, and we need to learn from this situation. And the lesson here is, let's get on with developing origin-based, home-based processing, because that's the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the last person before we close is Adesoye. Adesoye, please unmute and ask your question. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Yes.
Please, I'm a new person in this business of cashew. So I want to know the purpose of this group, because actually I didn't join on time. I just got a notification that I should join. So I want to know the purpose of this meeting. And I want to go into exportation of cashew. So how can you help me in knowing what to do, how to go about it? That is my question.
Okay, I will ask Dr. Odufia to just give a brief insight.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you for your question. First of all, you need to be export ready, because export has its own language. We'll be willing to guide you before you even choose a product. You need to do the needful. You need to be export ready. You need to have the local documentation, registration with Nigerian Export Promotion Council, register your business and all and that. So the moment that is done, the step one, and then you have a by knowledge of what export is all about, the do and don't, how to navigate your way to the port and every other thing. Then we can now go into product specific. If you want to do your do cashew nut, you need to know cashew nut. No, like if you have come earlier when Jim was talking, he said RCN. If you don't know cashew nut, you don't know the one that is RCN and the one that is kernel. So that is just what I can tell you. You get in touch with us. We'll be able to guide you, mentor you, and then where it is bigger than us, getting to market access, we can ask Jim to come in, market access, standard certification, and the rest. So that's what I can tell you for now. I will not be able to say much in this webinar, and just get in touch with the Institute.
Thank you very much, Dr. Odufia. On that same note, I want you to give a vote of thanks, probably to also thank some of our attendees of this webinar, and to also appreciate them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dennis. I want to first of all thank Jim for the opportunity. I know he has a very tight schedule. The other day I called him, he was in Asia. The other day he'll be in Europe. And here we are able to get him to sit down for the next 3 hours. So Jim, thank you so much for having that flair on helping Africa, not only Nigeria, because I know you are also a speaker with the African Cashew Alliance. So in spite of your white skin, we want to adopt you as an African cashew champion. So you are welcome. Then to the other participants, Osita, Hamza, and all, I want to thank you for the time well spent. And let it not end here. I want to say that we will get on to still hold Jim on other things he can do for us, from certification to market access and the rest, and possibly also bringing investment into the sector. Like he said, that Africa has a huge investment in cashew export. So people have belief in him and they have trust in him. And I also want to assure him that with the Institute, we will not allow his years of building trust to be taken for granted. We do everything possible to make sure that even if it's 2 or 3 organizations that are being supported, that they will do it in such a way that other people will want to come into the scene. So I want this to continue. And if you've not dropped your phone number, your email address, please fill the form and do that for continuity. And we can be giving you information. Like most of the time, we do what we call request for product information. Like Dennis had that desk. So there's a lot we just do for our members. And we also encourage you, if it's possible, to join our membership so they can fight this advocacy war, doing things right in Nigeria. And you know, most of our legislatures are not so vested with this. So sometimes people bring things to them and they just act on it. We, the industry actors, need to get to them, need to talk to them and give them reasons why certain things should not be done. So I wouldn't want to blame them 100%. Rather, I want to say, let's work as a team and have a strong institutions instead of having strong individuals. So in the Institute, we have an online learning platform now that you can go to our site and see the online academy. We are not just working for today, we are also trying to make sure that students in the university understand export and then get themselves ready, because it would be too absurd for them to just come out and you tell them export. So we have what we call the Student Export Development Program that we are taking to schools. Currently, we are engaging some universities and students are showing interest. So by the time they leave school and you're talking to them about cashew nut, it will not be a new thing for them. So I want to say thank you for everybody that spent their time to be here. And then on the board there, you have my number and also the number of people in the institute you can talk to. Feel free to talk with us. The sick man said, I will never let you go. So we'll never allow Jim to go, except we get the blessing of this sector, and not only to cashew sector, all the ingredient sector. So thank you so much. Remain blessed. Feel free to get in touch with us at any given time. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dufia. Thank you very much, Mr. Jim Fitzpatrick, for your time. It's I would say it's a good time with you and with all that you have given to us, and for those who have participated, I believe is the time well spent, and with the insight we glean from this webinar, I believe it will also spur us to connect more, and we'll be coming your way whenever we organize another seminar very soon for you to participate and also for you to have an insight into what is happening in the value chain. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Mr. Jim. We hope to see you soon, and to everyone for participating in this webinar. Take care, everyone. Bye.